In this episode of How It Was, you'll find out why tea bags used to be called tea bombs, how vegetarian sausages saved Germany from starvation, and why women only started using sanitary pads in the 20th century. Let's go! Top 8 inventions of World War I. World War I is one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. This war changed a lot of things, one of them being the map of Europe. Over 18 million people died in World War I, and the survivors are often referred to as the lost generation. However, as it often happens, the severe crisis opened the door to new ideas and technology. Now we'll tell you about 8 most important inventions which owe their success to World War I. We cannot imagine our lives without them anymore. The zipper. The first prototype of the zipper was patented by Elias Howe, an American, in 1851. But Howe didn't try to make money from his invention. He had other things to handle. 5 years before that, Howe had patented his model of the sewing machine. Then he had gone back to England for 3 years. Coming back, he found Singer sewing machines on the market, which looked a lot like his model. Howe filed a lawsuit. The proceedings went on for 5 years, and ended in Howe's victory in 1854, but the inventor never came back to his zipper concept. 40 years later, the zipper was reinvented. The patent was awarded to engineer Whitcomb Leo Judson. Funnily enough, it didn't work out again. The construction turned out expensive to produce and too breakable. It also needed a special key to fasten. Swede Gideon Sundback improved upon Judson's clasp locker concept. He reduced the size of teeth and increased their quantity, adding a slider instead of a key. The new fastener came on the market in 1914, the year that World War I started. The US Army started using the zipper for their clothes and footwear. It was even more appreciated in the Navy, since it was almost waterproof. At the end of the war, French high-fashion manufacturer Hermès purchased the patent for the zipper. Even so, for many years, it remained a privilege of men, while women wearing clothes with a zipper were considered promiscuous. The wristwatch. The first famous owner of a clock strapped to the arm was Queen of England Elizabeth I, back in the 16th century. Men used to say they would rather wear a skirt than that. 3 centuries passed before Kaiser Wilhelm decided to give wristwatches to German marine officers. The British obtained their first army models during the war against the Boers in the early 20th century, but they only gained popularity during World War I. That was because the British started using the tactic of creeping barrage, which was all about the timing. Here's how it went. The artillery would fire at the enemy, and the infantry was supposed to step in and attack right after that, before the enemy had enough time to leave their hiding places and get to their machine guns. To avoid getting shot down by their own artillery, the infantry needed to know the exact time the shooting would stop. This invention proved so important that the British Army Officer Manual put a wristwatch first place on the list of the necessary equipment. In 1917, the Imperial War Cabinet ordered wristwatches for lower-ranking officers for the first time. It meant that the soldier would not be wasting precious time pulling a watch out of his pocket, and his life could depend on those few seconds. After the war, a wristwatch was not viewed as a mere women's accessory anymore. Instant coffee. Like the 2 previous inventions, instant coffee had existed even before the World War, but it is hard to identify the inventor. The first attempt to create instant coffee was made in the US in the middle of the 19th century. When the Civil War started, it was rationed to the Union soldiers, future winners of the war. The soldiers themselves, however, were not too excited. The drink tasted like sludge rather than coffee. The product was quickly discontinued. In 1890, David Strang from New Zealand patented instant coffee, and 11 years later, American of the Japanese descent Satoru Kato filled a patent for stable, soluble coffee powder. However, their products never gained market success. A new stage in the history of instant coffee started in 1906. American inventor George Constant Louis Washington came up with a more practical production technology and started his own brand in the US in 1910. Still, Americans weren't too eager to switch to instant coffee, since the taste was still disgusting. What saved Washington from bankruptcy was World War I. He got purchase orders for instant coffee from the US and Canadian armies. The soldiers liked it as an easier way to get their caffeine fix. In 1917, Washington supplied 6 times as much instant coffee to American soldiers as he sold to civilians in the entire US. The inventor got quite a lot of money. There was even a coffee division in the US Department of War. Its chair actually claimed that instant coffee helped soldiers recover after a toxic gas attack. The teabag. Invention of the teabag is attributed to American entrepreneur Thomas Sullivan. It was exactly one of those situations when genius is all about simplicity. In the early 20th century, tea merchants would send samples of their products to clients in small tins. But Sullivan's business was quite small, and tins were becoming more expensive. In 1904, he came up with the idea to pack his samples into small silk bags. It was cheaper and looked prettier. The clients did not get the idea though, and started brewing their tea right in the bags. During World War I, the German company TEABAG copied the idea and managed to streamline a mass production of tea bags for the military. Soldiers would call them tea bombs. Along with instant coffee, they were very convenient to brew, so tea packaged in bags became the most popular drink in the trenches. Vegetarian sausages. Vegetarian sausages weren't at all a product of love for animals, but rather a product of despair. Before the war, many pigs were reared at German farms. They were fed with barley, which was purchased from Russia. But then the war started. Russia was in the Entente, and Germany in the Triple Alliance. The trade between them halted. As early as in 1915, Germany faced food shortages. The government decided that pigs were too much of a luxury. They had no food to feed people, let alone animals. 5 million pigs were killed to make tinned meat, while barley and potatoes were to be used for people only. This event is referred to as Schweinemorde, which means pig massacre. It was a complete failure. Some of the meat went bad, and the harvest of barley and potatoes dropped the following year because there wasn't enough dung to use as fertilizer. That's why in the winter of 1917, the whole of Germany switched to turnips. It was not very nourishing, and Germans were starving en masse. What saved the day was the vegetarian sausage. Then Mayor of Cologne, Konrad Adenauer, invented a sausage made from a mixture of soy, wheat flour, corn, barley and rice. Adenauer couldn't obtain a patent in Germany, but somehow he managed to secure one in June 1918 when the war was still on in Britain, Germany's enemy. Unbelievable. Daylight saving time. The idea of putting the clocks forward or backward depending on the season is often attributed to Benjamin Franklin, American politician and scientist, who looks at us from the $100 note. But the real story was a little different. Staying in Paris as an ambassador, Franklin noticed that the locals tended to go to bed late and then sleep in. He considered this a waste of candles. Then he sent a comic letter to the local newspaper, suggesting to tax curtains, introduce candle rationing, and wake up citizens at the break of dawn with church bells. The idea of daylight saving time was brought up within the British Empire on the verge of the 20th century. Parliament, however, did not support this initiative. In 1916, when the war was in full swing, Germany and Austria-Hungary introduced daylight saving time. This helped them use less artificial lighting to save coal, always needed at war. Other European countries figured it was not a bad idea and followed the example. When the war was over, some countries, including Germany, reverted to standard time, while others kept the practice. Daylight saving time didn't gain popularity again until World War II. Stainless steel. Steel which doesn't rust or corrode was invented in preparation for World War I. Everyone could feel that a mass conflict was on the horizon, and the armourers of enemies-to-be were putting every effort into perfecting their wartime weapons. As a result, stainless steel was invented in Germany, Britain and the US at the same time. During the war, stainless steel was used for combat aircraft engines, but the new product did not gain wider popularity until architects stepped in. After a high-end hotel in London procured a stainless steel sidewalk canopy, the whole world started talking about the new miraculous material. Sanitary pads. Before the 20th century, women had to fashion all kinds of protection when they were on their period. They usually used folded pieces of fabric. The first single-use sanitary pads appeared at the end of the 19th century. They were too expensive for most women though. The revolution was caused by French and American medical nurses. During the war, they started using cellulose bandages designed for dressing the wounded. Cellulose bandages were great at absorbing blood, and importantly, relatively cheap. The idea quickly gained traction. When the war was over, bandage manufacturers had a lot of leftover cellulose. The companies decided to look into the nurse's life hack, and the first sanitary pads, Kotex, made from fabric and cotton, entered the market in the 1920s. Competitors soon followed in Kotex's footsteps. The production kept growing in the future, with the product becoming more and more affordable. In the next episode of How It Was, we'll tell you about ancient drugs. What did our ancestors, well, use? And how did it affect their culture? Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to be the first to find out about our new episodes.